Our scripture this morning comes from the Gospel according to Luke in the 10th chapter. We're just going to read a couple verses as you hear the story a little bit more in a moment. But we read from Luke chapter 10, verses 33 to 34, and then skip down to 36 through 37. I invite you to hear God's word for us this day. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was. And when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And then jumping down to verse 36. Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? Jesus asked. The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." I want to share with you this morning a reflection on the Good Samaritan. Though he was a Jew and upright in every way, keeping the Sabbath, paying his temple tax, fasting on holy days, and though he was ritually pure as well, and though because of these things he expected God's favor and protection, still, in spite of all the good he did and his solid trust in God, one day he found himself a heap of bloody flesh left for dead on the road down to Jericho. Except for the flowing of his tears, he was utterly unable to move. Stripped of his clothes, his money, and worse, his dignity, innocence, and beliefs, he thought with a jolt, "Evidently, things are not like I've always thought they were." Suddenly, with an ear pressed to the ground, he heard the soft thud of footsteps coming near. And then a long pause. Then footsteps again, retreating. He couldn't believe what he saw. It was a priest who surely knew the law, how it says, "Refuse no one the good that is in your power to do. You must help your neighbor, that is, whoever happens to be near you." The priest, of course, had not seen a neighbor or even a fellow Jew. He saw a corpse and a source of impurity. And a priest, too important and good, couldn't get sidetracked from his holy work in life. So he scurried by while the broken man lay on in the hot sun, his life slowly seeping away and despair settling in like a rigor mortis of the heart. Then again there were footsteps and hope, a pause, and then footsteps fading again. It was a Levite this time, an assistant to the priest. He crossed the road. He came near enough to touch him. He reached out, and then, fearing it was a trap, pulled back his hand, wrapped his garment close, and shuffled on, nervously glancing back. Now, something new swept over the injured man. It was shame. What ought to have brought those good men near had sent them running in terror and disgust. Why do we do that to each other, he wondered, adding sorrow to sorrow. And then he heard, a third time, footsteps. Gathering his last shreds of dignity and will, he closed his eyes to another round of cruel indifference. At least he didn't have to watch it. Again, there was the dreadful pause on which the whole world might turn, and the footsteps drawing closer, faster. He braced himself for a kick, a brutal search. But instead, there was a cool and gentle touch, and a low and tender voice, caught with sadness. When he was lifted on to the grass, he saw the face of a Samaritan, one of those hated half-Jews. A good Jew would rather add days to a journey than to travel through Samaritan territory. So his heart cringed, but his flesh sighed with relief. And in the loving, pitying hands of this Samaritan, his rage and shame began to melt away. The Samaritan poured wine and oil into the bloody wounds and wrapped them with strips torn from his clothing. He tenderly lifted the man onto his own donkey and guided it slowly to an inn, where he tended to the wounded one all through the night. And then he left provisions for his recovery and promised to return to be sure he was well. The Jew learned more from the Samaritan that day than all his years of studying the Torah. The word is very near you, Moses had said, in your mouth and on your heart, so that you may do it. All his life, the Samaritan, this foreigner, had experienced at the hands of good folks like himself the humiliation and the shame that he had endured in this one hateful afternoon. The word was written in the Samaritan's heart, to be sure, and left no room for bitterness or fear or lines drawn in the sand. He learned that the heart of God's love is love. Its intention is love. And that laws and creeds and codes and principles are meant to bind us all together in deeper love and community. And when they cease to do so, they should be set aside. And that the shame and guilt and blame we attach to suffering, ours and others, serves only to deepen pain. And he was reminded of some things he'd always known, but might have come close to forgetting, like love is in the doing of what we say we believe, and purity is a matter of the heart, and a neighbor is anyone at all who needs us. And a hero is the one who chooses to help. This verse is from Jesus' parable about the Good Samaritan, who helped a man who was lying by the road, beaten and wronged. He bandaged the man, he cared for his wounds, and carried him to safety. From this parable comes the term Good Samaritan, which means a person who voluntarily offers help or compassion in times of trouble or distress. Do you think that the Samaritan thought about whether he would help this man or not? Isn't this some shaking? No? No, I think he saw a man who was hurt, somebody who needed help, and voluntarily and automatically helped him. Take a moment to put yourselves in the shoes of the Samaritan. Would you have reacted differently? And how does the Samaritan compare to community helpers and heroes, like our firefighters and our first responders? Just like the Samaritan, community helpers and heroes help others in need. They help them immediately, and they carry them to someone that can continue to help them, just like the Samaritan. We even today have the Good Samaritan law that covers someone legally who stops and helps with good intention. Local fire and rescue workers, and particularly volunteers, are in many ways good Samaritans. They give of their time to help those in distress. It does not matter who their victims are or the convenience of assisting them. It matters that they are our neighbor and that they are in need. The fire and rescue workers serve everyone out of love. We will be showing support and appreciation for their service with our work project this morning. But let's not forget the person the Good Samaritan helped. The man who lay beaten and robbed by the side of the road. Even though tragedy had struck, the story of the Good Samaritan reminds us that God's love is also always there for us. We can be just like the Good Samaritan, concerned and responsive to someone who has experienced adversity. We discover that a little support may give others the courage and the confidence needed to face challenges and recover their lives. We also can hold others in prayer. Years ago, a young boy, not even school age, told me that every time he heard or saw a fire truck or ambulance, he prayed. I've never forgotten the wisdom of that little boy. Now, whenever I hear a siren, I lift up a simple prayer for the first responders, any victims, and the families that will be affected by the emergency. This morning, our mission project, our work of our worship, is to create grab-and-go buckets for our first responders and firefighters in Byers just down the street.